Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Noyes, Head of Americas for AIMA. Today, I have the pleasure of moderating a conversation on a few of my favorite things: AI, IR, DDQs. Apparently, all my favorite things have acronyms, but you're really in for a treat. And I'm grateful to our partners at Central for producing us and bringing us together. So, AI-enabled innovation has been a key theme for AIMA and for our members. And, in just the past couple of days alone, we had our Innovation Day yesterday in London, and we have new AI research out on Monday. So I'm excited to go deeper into this particular use case. It's especially relevant in this challenging capital raising environment confronting our members. And while I have plenty of questions to guide us, you in the audience are also invited to chime in with those of your own using the Q&A button. I'll kick things off by having our panel introducing themselves, starting with Brian.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Brian Walter. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Fairbridge Asset Management, a real estate private credit firm.
Wonderful. Chris?
Hi, everybody. Chris Erickson, former managing partner, CFO of Jackson Square Partners. Career was 10 years at Goldman, followed by 20 years with the team associated with Jackson Square Partners inside of a handful of different corporate wrappers. Most of my career on the buy side was spent as a PM and analyst, and the last several actually operating the firm in the managing partner role I mentioned earlier.
Oops. Wonderful. And Eric?
Hello, Eric Herdeman. I'm head of business development for Central. For those of you that may not know, we're a Silicon Valley-based AI-powered diligence and response platform that's created a global network between asset managers and asset owner allocators. My background is I've actually been an allocator investor for about 30 years, fortunate to be a part of, I think, some of the pioneering groups in the space, SEI in the mid-90s, Goldman's external manager program in the early 2000s. And I spent about 10 years seeding new hedge funds and private equity firms on behalf of institutional and private clients. And kind of a common thread to my career has been fintech, more specifically diligence tech. So glad to be joining everyone today.
Fantastic. So I want to ground the conversation in just really considering how client communication has evolved over the decades. Will not be familiar or unfamiliar or surprising to those in the thick of it, but I think it's really important to sort of step back and recognize, the real change here. So, the theme I think is more data, more requests, more time. So, Chris, starting with you, your role evolved from an investment professional to CFO. So, when you're in that seat and suddenly responsible for all of these things, were you surprised about how many resources were being consumed with investor reporting and communications?
Yes. For the bulk of my career, the time was spent responding to one-off questions here and there, mostly about sort of near-term PM topics, state of the world, et cetera. So to shift to the other side and actually see, as it were, how the sausage was made was very eye-opening on many levels, not least of which was the degree to which people were spending time just actually jigsaw puzzling the different pieces together, to respond to the latest thing that had come across the transom, as opposed to spending quality time trying to figure out a thoughtful new answer, which in many instances would have been value added. And so, yes, that was sort of surprising. As it relates to things that had evolved over time, even just in my sort of 4 or 5 years on the operating side, it was clear that priorities were beginning to change on a bunch of different fronts, not least of which was, for instance, the SEC's increasing focus on making sure that managers were very thoughtful on vendor diligence. And so, yes, constantly evolving in the relatively short period of time that I was in the seat.
Wonderful. And, Brian, you're here as a rapidly growing boutique. First of all, congratulations. That is an achievement, especially against this backdrop. But can you talk about the strain, these obligations have put on your business and, whether you're seeing that more from existing clients or prospective clients?
Sure. having spent the first 20 years of my career in the public debt markets or CUSIP world, and then the last 10 in the private world, I've seen sort of the collapse of the bridge between the two from a information and opacity standpoint as people demand more and more information from the alternatives or private market space. So that's come from many different fronts. That's come from regulators. That's come from prospective investors through the due diligence process and subscription process. That comes from current investors expecting more transparency and information. And really, they want this all done in an easy and timely fashion. I equate it to the college application process, right? College applications have spiked over the last 10 years because it's a lot easier to apply to more schools through technology. The same is true of requests of managers like ourselves, and that's put a lot of strain on all parts of our business to respond in an easy, timely, and clear manner.
I can only imagine. And Eric, in your former advisory role, helping institutional managers crack the private wealth markets, and that, kind of is a key theme, I think, for alternatives these days, enduringly, what sort of demands from that channel did you see that kind of introduced additional complexity to existing fund operations?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Brian and Chris had mentioned. It's not getting any easier. Questions just seem to be continue to be added. It's almost like government spending. Questions are added, but somehow questions don't seem to be taken away. And it's increasingly a competitive landscape. I think in some ways the golden age of asset management, and margins have been quite attractive for quite some time. Markets have generally gone up for several decades now, and folks are seeing more and more competition, and they're having to respond to more questions more quickly, keep things up to date. And clients are very demanding. Cerulli put out a report late last year about the key elements for manager selection and also manager termination. And client service was number 2 on that list. Not surprising, I'm sure, to everyone on the line. So it's important to be responsive to your clients and provide that customer service as things are getting more and more challenging.
Yeah, no, I can attest to that. I mean, AIMA's been in the DDQ world now for a couple of decades, and we are doing our best with our 2025 edition. We tried very, very hard not just to make it longer, but also retire some of the older questions. But it's true that there's more and different risks evolving that you don't want to ignore. And certainly the variety of investment strategies continue to expand, which leads to different sorts of questions that you need to ask. And that's sort of to my next point. It's not just the volume of questions growing, but also the nature of those questions. So Brian, starting with you again, one of the mega themes in private credit, or I should say credit markets more broadly, is the convergence of public and private credit. And private credit managers are increasingly expected to have similar transparency and reporting for investors accustomed to public market disclosure. So what does this look like in practice?
Yeah, we are driving towards them being ubiquitous. We're on that path. Visibility and transparency are key. If you think about the private markets in general, whether it's private credit or private equity 30 years ago, it was really just very large institutions, Yale Endowment, et cetera, accessing the private markets. Today, what we have is high net worth and family offices and independent RIAs being the drivers, and the last pocket of money that really is underinvested in the alt space. So my job as a growing boutique asset manager that doesn't have name recognition is to remove that veil of or shroud of opacity and secrecy of how many individuals think of the private markets, and do that through transparency, do that through information, do that through timeliness, and also do that through ease of access, right? So now once they are even committed to the product, now you have to make it easy for them to access that product, which is something we hear from independent RIAs which is where the due diligence process and the subscription process come in. There's, it's probably a number two reason people don't go into alt in the individual world is because it's very difficult to access. Also, a lot of independent RAs don't have the depth of bench to due diligence managers. So we run into their backlogs. People love what we do. They love our firm, but it's going to take them 6 months to look at us because they have two other managers ahead of us in the queue. So using processes to get them good quality answers in a timely fashion is imperative for us.
And that's such a good point that the burden is not only on the GP side, it's also on the LP, her LP friends, right? And, they know they need to be, do their duty in having a robust review and, really kicking the tires. But, that's also an equal investment of time and resource and review on their side. So really great to flag that. Chris, what changes did you observe in the type of information requested over time?
Probably the biggest change we saw was around the nature of questions that were directed toward the portfolio side. So we were a fundamental equity shop, growth oriented, and the questions coming in regarding not just names and views as things were happening in real time, but across a broad spectrum of other topics, including even macro. The not only did the volume grow and the depth that the answers were seeking grow, the timeline shrunk. And so it got to the point where almost real-time communication was expected, which I'm sure mileage will vary in the audience in terms of how rapidly PMs are able to respond and how the communication loops work in your firms. I happen to be at a place where they were not necessarily easy to close. And so herding the cats, if you will, was an interesting challenge. I'd gone from being a cat to becoming a herder and had much more an appreciation for what all of that meant. And when sort of Gen AI burst onto the scene in late 22 and early 23, it almost immediately occurred to me that it'd be very interesting to apply the tool, if you will, to internal communications within my firm and use it as a means of coming up with a first draft answer to get to questions truly in real time. And so that was not an opportunity that we were able to execute on in that moment, but remains, I think, a tantalizing prospect.
Yeah, no, certainly. And we'll sort of lean into this AI theme, which is the point of the webinar in just a moment. But, certainly the textual nature of Gen AI, there's been so many questions from the investor relations community through the AIMA peer group and other channels, really about this promise and how it can be leveraged because again, so inefficient. I think it's widely recognized, right? And everybody there just must be a better way to focus on the results and what we need and just minimize the time and burden spent. But also, I think to your point too, that you allude to, right? Like the more data you're reporting, the more transparency, you're naturally then going to get more follow-up questions, on the basis of that, right? So it's a self-perpetuating cycle. And Eric, you've seen diligence tech as this consistent through line in your career. So, even before the chat GPT moment that we had a few years ago, there's been move towards improving the situation through digitization. Certainly Central was an early mover in that. So can you kind of give us a little bit
Sure.
of that history lesson of technology?
Absolutely. I'm going to date myself a little bit here. But I really think there's been three themes for diligence tech: efficiency, trust and data integrity, and then I'm going to touch on kind of the transparency that we've been talking about as well. From an efficiency standpoint, I've seen over the last 3 decades the move from data manipulation, cleaning, processing, reorganizing to actually doing work and analysis flip from 80-20 to 20-80. 80% grunt work to now, more 20 or 10% grunt work. And that's been driven by the trend of, first analog to digital. Those on the call that might remember the old MSCI Blue Books and getting them on CD-ROM where you could load them on your computer. Um, my first job out of school, I was clipping articles on the sell side in trade magazines for an entertainment an analyst. Just shocking to think of. And then the move from local to online. And that really opened up a network and collaboration element, which has been highly powerful. But I feel like we've really kind of been in a rut since, and haven't really improved that much off of that, 10% processing data. The technologies of obviously of digital and online are old at this point. So we're definitely due for some change. And this also relates to trust and integrity of the data. Sitting in the allocator shoes, it's an unsettling feeling and it's a different analysis when what you're looking at, you're not even sure if you can trust. And there's a series of dependency. There's a chain. Do I trust the analyst that put this together for me? Can they trust where they got it, where they got the information from? So, in a similar vein, manual processes have really held us back as an industry. And the last point I'll make in terms of the theme of diligence tech is related to transparency. I think a lot of that has to do with allocators being more educated of, this is naturally a trend in our society as a whole. You just have more information. And they're also using more sophisticated tools. I remember the early days of Goldman when we brought on fax analysts. We were one of the first ones to do that. We actually started to use the tools that the managers themselves used. So big push from returns based to holdings based. I think we're starting to see with some of the most sophisticated clients, similar things in private market space. So of course, this has very significant implications in how you communicate with your clients, knowing that, they're going to have, basically the same information you have.
Yeah. So enter the Gen AI revolution, right? Up till now. And, the promise of AI is efficiency. And it's, obviously it's not only touching, can you imagine that's not only touching investor communications within alternative investments. It's, it's really reshaping so many industries and parts of our lives. So, Eric, given that Central is a Silicon Valley technology company, let's just pause and zoom out a little bit to get that big picture of what impact AI is having. Just a couple of telling anecdotes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to keep this brief. As you can imagine, we could go on for a really long time about this, but and I'll also try to kind of provide some nuggets that we see being a Silicon Valley company. We've all read the headlines on the number of roles at Microsoft and Salesforce that are going to AIs. So I'll try to keep it kind of some of the most profound elements that we found, and also how it pertains to our industry. First thing I'd say is kind of the hype cycle, if you will. You take Amara's law. We tend to overestimate the impact of new technologies in the short term and underestimate them in the long term. Our view is that's pretty much the case, with the exception of we think there actually may be an underestimation of the impact of verticalized AI, domain-trained AI, their impact along all time horizons. Second point I'd make, a question that we get a lot, and I think we're all thinking about, is how does this phenomenon compare to prior seismic changes in our lifetime, namely the internet and mobile. I take a lot of kind of direction, and you really appreciate the perspective of the Central founder, Sanjeev Deer, who founded payments company Cash Edge that built a technology called Pop Money that eventually became Zelle. And Sanjeev points to the Bill Gates quote that he recently made in February, that comparing AI to, say, the internet, AI could be significantly bigger, as it's hard to identify an upward bound of AI. And then the last thing with respect to thinking about our industry and the notion of how to adopt AI, a theme that we keep seeing over and over again, and we believe is it can't be done incrementally. It has to be, it has to be a pretty significant move into the space, but it does have to be kind of domain constrained. And what I mean by that is there's actually a really good article that McKinsey put out this summer talking about the fact that it can't be patchwork, narrow use cases, but must be a significant commitment that's domain based. So operations or distribution, as an example, these have shown the highest ROIs when it's more of a kind of bolt on or incremental. They're not seeing the ROI, and their view is that the fact that technology spend is increasing by 9%, and we're not nearly seeing the productivity gains or the results of that is a function of folks not taking a more significant commitment to the space. They're calling it a leapfrog opportunity if you do make the commitment to the space, and in their view, could unlock efficiencies at 25 to 40%. One other thing I mentioned kind of in that vein is Toby Lucky, the founder of Shopify, put out an interesting memo to his employees, I think in April, that's along the similar vein, that basically there has to be a significant commitment to realize the benefits.
Yeah, no, and again, these are some of the themes we'll also be unpacking in our upcoming research. But I think let's focus in on these different models of AI. Since you referenced it, there's generalist tools like ChatGPT, and again, there's a consumer-facing application that most of us will be familiar with. There are commercial licenses, but it's a generalist tool rather than an industry-specific solution. So, Chris, can you talk a little bit more about those distinctions and why you gravitate towards industry-specific tools?
Sure. Having made an attempt internally at Jackson Square to solve some of the problems we're talking about today, we came away from the experience having concluded that purpose-built tools were almost certainly going to be the better way to go across a number of dimensions. Maybe the most important one was hallucinations. For as powerful as the frontier models are, they aren't, they're designed to return an answer, even if they have to sort of
They didn't
encrypt
learn the
it
show
for you.
your work lessons
Exactly.
rolled into us in math class.
Exactly. And so the purpose-built tools, however, do one of the features that's interesting is the notion of creating a trail of breadcrumbs to show you exactly how the model synthesized the answer. And so from a credibility perspective, and a confidence that the first draft, it may well be the final draft or pretty darn close to it. That was certainly an important point. The notion that there might be any amount of data leakage from kind of certainly not only our own kind of proprietary answers, but customer data leakage was obviously horrifying. And it's not entirely clear to me whether that problem has been entirely solved at the frontier model companies. But there seem to be enough stories floating out there in the ether that made it at least an open question, and not something that necessarily we wanted to wrestle with. Whereas obviously purpose-built company would recognize in their bones that that absolutely could not happen. And then, I would say the third point that became clear over time is just from a reliability perspective. I think we've all probably had the experience of working with the main consumer-facing tools, and being maybe even in the same session, sort of blown away by what they could do in certain things, and then sort of shocked by what they would not do. You haven't lived until you've asked ChatGPT a question and then had it start thinking and then just completely crap out, right? No answer to the query. And so between, reliability questions on the one hand, and then the notion of just all the things that one had to keep track of, sort of where Claude was at a given moment versus ChatGPT versus Gemini. Which tool should I be using right now based on the specific task that I'm going after? All of that was just the notion that we at a boutique firm would be able to manage that, even with people who were sort of very interested in getting to a great end result, and a lot of talent. It was just too much. And so the net of all of it was that we were very focused on trying to find a great tool that would, in fact, bring domain expertise and management of the various sort of complexities to us so that we could just get what we needed from the tool.
Yeah, no, that's a helpful perspective. And Brian, Eric brought up the notion of leapfrogging. So as a boutique firm, how have you been able to use AI tooling to help level the playing field with some of your larger peers?
Yeah, so it's kind of twofold, and now we get to the exciting part. We've talked a lot about the challenges of being in the private markets versus the public, and being a boutique within that private market. But the AI tools are allowing us to level that playing field in many, many different ways. First, it's internal processes allowing us to efficiently and timely respond to requests and answer inquiries. And on the external side, we were able to have a voice that is similar to many of the larger firms that exist out there. We can do that. We can be a thought leader. We can do blogs. We can do white papers. We can do podcasts. We can do all sorts of things to help reduce the difference between large firms and small firms.
And quickly on that, are you using some like AI support on the writing as well to help draft and refine those
Yeah,
pieces?
we'll do some of that, more idea generation and things like that. We put a human element between our firm and the release of any of that
Yeah.
information. We're not auto releasing anything like that.
You're not using Google Notebook to auto generate a podcast. It
No,
is
not.
shocking, again, the fact the drafts that it can put up. But yes, I think there is this general aversion to, I think, what's generally is kind of termed AI slop, in terms of your ear picks up on sort of the unfiltered AI generated thought leadership. So that doesn't surprise me. It's still the
Yeah,
humans.
certainly your reputation and what you're projecting to the market, you don't want to appear lazy or not thoughtful. And from an internal process standpoint, and with DDQs and things like that, an example is we had a very large investor that used Central actually for their operational due diligence. They asked us over 400 questions to answer. But the positive of getting through that process for four of us within our firm to do it is we now had a database of answers. And now we've been able to use AI to load up new DDQ requests into that database, match it up against those answers, and at least start to populate new DDQ requests. It gets you 70 or 75% of the way there. And then we have to go in and critique. The next challenge is a lot of our information changes quarterly, right? What are our returns, our assets under management, our top 5 investors, a lot of the repeat questions that we get. So we now have to create an internal database that AI can go reach into and access on a quarterly basis for the most current and recent information.
Yeah, that sounds so much more efficient than when I used to walk the desks and just stand over my colleagues with a piece of paper. Need the latest information. And then of course that's just for one DDQ. So no, that's really, again, I think, at least for me, and in conversations with peers, I think I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one, right? Just hearing these use cases, so much about it is surfacing the possibility, right? Like, I think, Chris, to your point, right? Like, oh, it could do that now. Fantastic. Sometimes it'll fail at the easy stuff, and then I try to reframe it as like, humanity's still got a chance, right? Like, we have an advantage. Frustrating, but you got to see the silver linings. But it since it is evolving, right? The technology and the applications as well. I find it so insightful just to hear, how folks are using it, which is why I'm so grateful for you all spending your time with us today and doing that. Eric, given how quickly this technology, it's evolving, again, to this point, what are some other examples you've seen from clients and, what's that impact been?
Yeah, so the AI engine has to really distill an incredible amount of data from multiple sources, internal and external. And as Brian mentioned, 400 pages, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages need to be distilled down to a usable subset. So there has to be an intelligent engine that knows how to decipher, deltas, things that have changed, things that are relevant, and really prioritize. This is absolutely key. And in order to do that successfully, verticalization and domain training is absolutely critical. Our industry, has so many unique characteristics that just can't be covered by a generalist model. Brian alluded to one. The nature of the data is such that it's changing every day. You think about personnel turnover. There's a really big difference between a lead PM leaving and a rotational analyst. I mean, these are nuances in the business. You take SEC, the difference between an exam and an investigation, obviously massive differences. So it's very important. This is something that we value, to domain train with deep industry experience and knowledge, to to essentially, program and condition the model to be effective, to find solutions and to find answers that are usable. And the last thing I would mention is, output and reporting is such a critical element. These exercises aren't done in a vacuum. Everyone has constituents that they need to report to and communicate with internally and externally. So having an engine that is customizable, both in terms of format and the actual materials, is really, really important, with a certain tone. There's a different message, when you're evaluating internally versus reporting to a board versus reporting to clients. So an engine that can successfully take all of these things into account is critical.
Awesome. And Brian, there's a quick follow-up question for you asking how you did this, what technology you used to load the 400 questions in.
Well, we're using Central's technology, quite honestly, but we're working on systems where we'll have this database, and there are a lot of technologies out there that you can use, whether it be Notebook LM and loading up all our due diligence into there, and having a matching system there. But you're creating your own GPT in any of these LLM models, and loading it up with your information, and then putting up the questions and saying, please access this information and answer these questions as best you can with this all the information we've loaded up. That's the general concept of it. Now, to dig into more detailed information, so that exists out there. You literally download Notebook LM right now, load up a bunch of information, and start querying that information tonight. What needs to then happen on top of that sometimes is the GPTs don't access the information quite like you wanted to, and spit out the output in the form that you want. And that's where we are accessing third-party AI firms to create these patches to get the information exactly how we want it and where we want it, and in the format that we want it to deliver that output. So that's kind of the process. Is first I would start with some of these LLM GPT models, Chat GPT. You can create your own GPTs, Notebook LM, they all have them. And then it's getting that third party to really refine it for you.
Yeah, and and that really illustrates again the sort of broad tooling out there, and then some of the elements that we've been discussing about industry specific, being able to address the context of the questions and kind of why they're asked, and then also, the concerns that managers will have about the risks. And, again, I feel like we went from the challenges that we're solving. We had this bright sunny spot about all the opportunity with AI. We're back on challenges, right? Because, I think I had another conversation just last week, and there's so much upside potential from AI, but again, there's a whole host of risks that one must navigate, right? There's compliance, there's cyber, there's privacy, intellectual privacy, intellectual protection, sorry, just to name a few. And then there's also, kind of alluded to earlier, just like really, really bad writing that hurts me in my soul as someone who studied literature for a long time and just really hates really bad emails. So, the risks range in size, but I think it's important to really illustrate how folks are mitigating, these real risks while still getting the advantages and the promise, right? Why we're all excited about this. So, Brian, to start back with you, how are you looking at it?
From a risk standpoint, yeah, the opportunity is tremendous, but there's a lot of regulatory and compliance risk that certainly comes with this, as well as you say, just putting out bad information, which is why, for now we have a human editor in between the output that we're receiving from AI generated processes before it goes outside our firm. There's a simple example for us would be talking about the GPTs that I was discussing before would be, okay, it would be great for me to load up all of my subscribers' documents and their subscription documents into a GPT and have it create a database for me on when they subscribe, how much they subscribe, when their lockup period ends, all these sort of nice things that we'd like to have in one central place. I don't want to load up any subscriber information into a GPT because I don't know the cybersecurity risks that exist. So we're just not going to access this technology for that use. That will remain a manual process until we can get some assurances that there is, good cybersecurity around that process.
Yeah, no, and this is an evolving area. We did put out for members a checklist of questions to consider, when you're writing an AI policy. Again, not everyone has a policy yet, given how quickly this space is evolving. But yeah, caution, proceed with caution and proceed with intention, I think is the main thrust. And, it's going to continue to be a very, very rich area of focus for AIMA and our members, because quite frankly, it's the question we get all the time. What is everyone else doing? Right. And trying to navigate this space together. And Eric, I'm sure you're managing both the sending and receiving of vendor management due diligence tools, given the sensitivity of the data that you're touching, right? The sort of information that's transmitted in these DDQs. So, from your perspective, what questions should investment managers be asking when kicking the tires?
Yeah.
As well as ongoing monitoring, right? Because this is not a one and done. The models keep improving. So, you got to stay on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and what we're talking about here, this functionality of, taking in this information, and then querying, and creating, AI reports, is a functionality that we do at Central and, are building out continuously. So this is something very near and dear to our heart. You need to make sure that you work with a firm with deep technology capabilities in enterprise and institutional caliber clients. So we take a lot of pride in working with 10 of the top 50 global institutions, global financial institutions, and investment managers. And we've been put through the ringer for, their very rigorous compliance that you can imagine, major banks have in general, but in particular, their AI compliance. So this is very, very important and can't be underestimated. especially when it pertains to the client data that that you're putting into the system. A comment on AI in general, and as things are in transition, you know, there are a lot of offerings that are essentially a wrapper around GPT. And what I would encourage folks to do in picking a partner is to really dig into the depth of their resources and team and how long um, they've been building out their AI capabilities. For us at Central, it's really been 3 years now. And our response system, as an example, really is AI native. It's been built from the ground up with AI. And this has implications, a number of implications um, for the structure, the quality of results, that combined with the domain training, that we spoke a lot about. If you think about just a ChatGPT wrapper, I kind of use the analogy of yellowpages.com, yellow pages plus internet equals yellowpages.com. That's distinctly different than Yelp. Yelp is a reimagination of what the technology can do and is capable of. In this same vein, when looking at a technology team, you need groups that have experience building these enterprise caliber solutions at scale for major firms, but also have that entrepreneurial element where they can attract and implement with tremendous speed the technology that is just evolving at a breakneck speed. The reasoning capabilities, the agentic, the workflows that need to be incorporated. And I actually have found, coming from the allocator side, I actually think about evaluating a team the same way I would evaluate a management team. Look at leadership, caliber of experience, how they're integrated and functioning as a whole. Um, a deep analysis, and when you do that, you essentially you differentiate those that are playing catch up or trying to bolt on the technology versus where it's fundamental. Last thing I would say is from a performance standpoint, the one thing you can do is you can supply your data to these groups and you can take it for a test run. How accurate is it? Is it hallucinating? Is it understanding the terminology? There's really there's no substitute for that, and that can tell you quite a bit.
Awesome. And before we move on to training, there is a question from the audience. I don't know if anyone feels comfortable to answer in a great deal of depth, but there's a setting you can toggle on ChatGPT that allows you to not share your data with the model for training purpose. Is this setting not sufficient from a cybersecurity perspective to prevent confidential data from being shared? From my brief response, I would lead with is read the terms of service very, very carefully. And those terms of services are often getting updated. For firms that do use ChatGPT and similar, there's normally, enterprise licenses negotiated if they're truly going to be using, confidential data versus, say, using it for a quick translation of a public resource that's not particularly sensitive. I don't know if anyone wants to
Yeah,
expand on that.
this is a critical point. You want to make sure your data is not shared with the model, and this is um, very fundamental. That's definitely question number one. It's critical that it stays within, walled off within the user's domain.
Yeah, I'd add while that is a patch approach, there are a bunch of other aspects of it that are tricky. Among them, there are only so many things you can load into those windows. There are actual limits on the amount of data that they can ingest in the quote context window, as they refer to it. Um, you will still find that you need to prompt and reprompt to actually get to the precise answer that you want. Whereas with a purpose-built solution, there'd be prompt engineering happening in the background on the part of the product manager to do that for you. And then I actually even just find getting the results sort of into I, I've set up this temporary chat in order to get to the answer that I need, not share the data, but then I would like to retain the answer somehow. And then, you need to come up with some patch to figure that out. And so it ends up being, can it work? Yes. Is it a kludgy experience? Yes, very kludgy.
And this might, again, if someone has a viewpoint, I don't. Speaking of enterprise licenses, we've heard that a lot of AI companies start their pricing at 10 seats. You know, are you seeing companies amenable to smaller firms, 1 to 2 seats? I don't know, Brian, if you've had as a more boutique firm, if you have any experience kind of generally
with
if, with
actually.
like with enterprise like negotiating enterprise agreements with AI companies, either I guess industry verticals or more tools like a chat GPT.
Yeah, I find it's getting cheaper and cheaper. The subscriptions, to Chris's point, the cheap subscriptions get you only so much data that you can load up. The next level up is get you a lot more data. For instance, Notebook LM, I think you can put 50 pieces of data. If you upgrade to the next level, you can put 300. But it's as a cost to our overall business, it's fairly small. So we are amenable to doing it and giving it a try. But to Chris's point, even a lot of these GPTs won't accept certain types of data. Excel spreadsheets are not something you're going to be able to load into an LLM and say, hey, go find this piece of data in cell K32. It's not going to be able to do that. And I think a lot of people who just have an image of AI can do everything will be disappointed when they do that. And that's where you need the enterprise value programming to go find you the exact data that you want within your data set that you're providing. On the cybersecurity side, it's a matter of risk reward. Sure, I can click that toggle to say don't share my information with the LLM. I have no idea if someone could break through that firewall and get into my data. That's one piece I have to trust. It's all about trust, and for me, it's a risk reward standpoint from a business. If my subscriber data is breached, I'm done, right? My business is over. So I'm not going to take that risk, and it would take a lot for me to even think about it. It's not worth the risk. I'll just keep that a manual process in my firm where I know it's safe.
Thanks, Brian. Eric, I don't know, before we get to Chris and talk about training and implementation, do you have a perspective on like, is there a minimum fund size that, you work with or you see really embracing this?
Yeah, I mean, we try to be really flexible. I think that there's a democratization element, leveling the playing fields of AI. So we really work with all firms of all sizes, and try to make enable smaller and mid-sized firms to be more efficient and to be able to compete with the large and jumbo firms, if you will. That's really the point. That I would make in terms of market segmentation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because I mean, I know a lot of, tech innovation in the past. I've talked to, smaller managers and especially in hedge funds, like small is small. Sometimes in private credit, small is a very large hedge fund. And they kind of get to a certain point and they're like, oh, I just like I'm just too small, right? Like I don't have all of the pipes that connect to their pipes. But this is where the flexibility, I think, of AI, really shines in terms of that democratization. So Chris, finally, tools, regardless of promise, often fall down without strong training and implementation. So, what are your tips of how investment managers can set themselves up for success?
Yeah, to kind of pivot off my last answer where I talked a little about experiences that I'd had at Jackson Square in trying to do this with the frontier models. I guess the main conclusion would be for most firms, don't try this at home. It's just the degree of complexity that you're likely to bite off, not realizing sort of what you're getting into, is meaningful. While the tools are flashy and fun and can blow you away, even when you're DIYing it, the net of all of it is that just the amount of time spent, I think, is not likely to be rewarded by a great outcome in the way that you could get, in fact, if you went out and diligenced the market, looked at the opportunities, and landed on someone who is doing this in a purpose-built way, like, for instance, Central is. I'm open to the notion that the largest firms will have enough resources, dedicated time, thought, talent, all of the above, that they might be able to make it work and stand it up. I think there's then still a question of sort of maintaining the thing. And, we talked earlier about being on top of like which model does what best at the moment, and all, prompt engineering and how that evolves and so forth. So maybe, not totally sure that all of those firms will get it right in any case, and may end up coming back to the purpose-built world, but they will probably go after it. For small firms and for medium-sized firms, I was at a, firm that was cuspy at 30 billion in assets, but kind of between those things. I would say that it's almost a slam dunk to just go with proven solutions with experts.
And Eric, you must be seeing lots of implementations, and what are some of your observations on the folks that really make the most of it?
Yeah, I've actually been very surprised at even larger firms that benefit from outsourcing. Some of the 10,000-pound gorillas, I would not think, I would think would have the resources to build something on their own. They have a number of, they've got a massive technology staff, a massive AI technology staff. But I've been surprised the extent even they are interested in an outsourcing solution. And I think it has to do with, ultimately, um, what the engine and solution is it's a dynamic portfolio of constantly changing underlying elements. Multiple agents, a reviewing agent, a writing agent, a reporting agent, multiple LLMs, and different versions of those LLMs that are changing constantly. So to have a very large, dedicated, outsourced team that is reviewing and curating those agents and those LLMs, specifically purpose-built and overlaid with the domain expertise that we've talked about throughout this call, is extremely valuable, and that's really been recognized by even larger groups. I think it comes down to accuracy of the output, and groups trying it on their own, and over time realizing that it's one thing to create it, it's another thing to maintain it. And they really don't want to be in the business, not core. They don't want to be in the business of managing an underlying portfolio of LLMs and agents for this purpose. Why not have a group that has, that's, obviously I'm speaking my own book, but that's extraordinarily deep on the technology side and extraordinarily deep on the domain expertise side, with industry experts that are constantly evolving and improving the solution.
So before we wrap up, looking forward to the future and what we're most excited about in terms of on the horizon, let's see if I can just summarize a couple of key points, right? We've gotten to a point where the burden of the frequency, the depth, and the nature of the requests for transparency and being responsive in a good client service way to your clients and prospects has just gotten overwhelming to, really a point to a tipping point, right? Enter on the scene AI, lots of promise in terms of, being able to source those answers smartly, but, again, it needs to be done in a thoughtful way that maintains the integrity of your data, is correct. And also, the implementation to manage those risks can be very, very challenging. So there's, domain tools can be, a great solution to that, and are often preferable for, both small and large investment managers as a result. And then once you commit to it, you got to commit and, stay on top of it and, and train and really set yourself up for success. So where are we going from here? You know, Eric, starting with you, what's really exciting for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a network effect here, and I think there is a lot of power of providing and offering for managers to communicate, respond to their clients, and asset allocators to perform more efficient and better research over time. The human will always stay in the loop in some capacity. But I'm extraordinarily excited about, if we go back to where we started this conversation, the 10-20% grunt work, of really reducing that down to essentially zero, and then utilizing these tools to be a force multiplier for underlying teams to really focus on the true actualized work, if you will.
Wonderful. That sounds like a great, great outcome. Brian, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, I think the way we think about it in our industry and amongst my peers is those that embrace this will be able to execute on speed, ease, and certainty of execution in a timely way and a quality way for customers. And the people that do that will leapfrog their peers. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Now, there's different levels to this, and when you go down the rabbit hole of AI, you can keep peeling and peeling and peeling. There's some simple things that you can use it for to save a lot of time. I get requests all the time. Give me 3-minute presentation, 5-minute presentation, 10-minute presentation. I just want to talk about the industry. I want to hear about your firm. I literally just load up my quarterly deck into a GPT and say, give me a 3-minute script, give me a 5-minute script, give me a script just on pages 1 to 20, which is about my industry. Give me a script on the back half of my presentation, which is about my firm. This is where you can save a lot of time and effort. That's kind of level one. But where I see AI right now is it's a tool. It's a really powerful tool. And to be able to, those that can think creatively on how to harness that tool are the ones that are going to, really excel and differentiate themselves. But when you do get down into the deeper layers, where I think AI is now is like the internet in the early days. There's a lot of different boutique firms that do different parts of it well. Just an example, this one does sound well, this firm does video well, this firm does language well. And that's where the patchwork of solutions can get very daunting for me. And that's where having experts that are focused on who does this well. We haven't gotten to the point where you can just go to one, Google package that has everything and they're the best at it all. It's a very patchwork
We're still
system.
in like the Alta Vista, getting to the dog pile type era for my
Yes, we haven't had,
fellow olds.
Google search become the dominant player, but
And Chris, last word to you.
Sure. To Brian's point, there are certainly interesting point solutions developing here and there, and it may well be that at the end of the day that we all have a series of point solutions across. I actually think the killer app is if you will, the company and the platform that can figure out how to take our data, synthesize what is needed from the data, and solve lots of the problems. Everything from, as we talked about today, sort of basic diligence responses, all the way through things on the investment side, let's say, writing investment memos, taking lots of different internal and external sources and pulling them together in a very efficient way and generating faster debate, discussion, and, ultimately conclusions. I think that the right company with the right domain experts and the right coders is likely to end up being a winner here, by being one throat to choke and doing all of the different things inside of one throat to choke in a very quality way.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences. Like I said, I think this is why it's critically important, right? Everybody wants to understand what everybody's doing. So also, I will tease up again, our report is coming out on Monday that, attaches some numbers to that, but these anecdotes are just so illustrative and helpful. Thank you, Central, for your support here today. and the work that you're doing, and certainly encourage folks with questions about their tooling to reach out directly, and we'll make sure that gets connected. But appreciate all of your attention, and best of luck surfing this AI evolution and revolution.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle.